Amen. Amen. All right, so I hope that was helpful. Okay. Look, in John, Yeshua says, and you shall have a relationship with the truth, and the truth relationship that you have will set you free. This is one of those truths that can set you free. Okay? Learning about forgiveness is a truth that will set you free of lots of pain, lots of suffering. Anyway, this is the Afterburn, the time after the teaching where if you have a comment or question, you can go ahead and raise your hand. Steve will bring around the mic. If you're on live stream, Rob will note those things down on the live stream desk there. This is also the time where people tend to go a little bit off the rails on the live stream. Please behave. You on the live stream. Let Kurt and Rob have their authority in the room to keep things with shalom and peace. Remember, if you guys don't behave with the shalom and peace that we're talking about and don't respect the authority in the room, then you're grieving the Spirit. You don't have to agree with anything we say here. If you don't agree, well, turn it off. It's on YouTube. Just go somewhere else. You don't have to stay on the channel disagreeing with us. But it would be inappropriate to come in to create a disturbance. Okay? There's a lot of Christian stuff out there that I don't agree with. I'm not about to tomorrow on Sunday walk into any church just to create a disturbance. Just because I don't agree with stuff they teach. So what do I do because I don't agree? I don't go. I watch some videos from time to time. People send me. If I don't agree, I watch as much as I feel I need to get the information I need. And if I really feel like it, I'll just turn it off, move on. Or I may watch the whole thing. Do you know I never give them thumbs down? Do you know we get thumbs down before the music is finished? My wife noticed that when she watches the live stream. She said, we got like 3 people that automatically every time will give us 3 thumbs down before we even get through the first 15 minutes. It's just the music. Already they're giving thumbs down. What's wrong with you people? Really? Your peace was that disturbed that you had to just give it a thumbs down? I don't give a whole lot of thumbs ups either. I just don't feel the need to voice my opinion. I watch. If I like it, I watch it. Maybe I'll watch something twice if I like it. If I don't like it, I probably won't watch it twice. I think we're kind of full of ourselves thinking that our opinion is so important that we have to put thumbs ups and thumbs downs and comments and everything like, okay, it makes you feel important, I guess. I don't, Now, the comments like saying things like, I appreciate this, and you want to thank somebody, so the word, so you can communicate, that's one thing. But the negative stuff, I don't get that, Are you just venting? I don't know. It doesn't hurt me. I don't do this with any thought or caring either way. People are going to do what they're going to do. All right, I hope they receive it and it's useful. If it's not, fine, move on. All right, who's next? Who wants to go first? Michael.
This might be a little out there, just saying. I've often wondered, like when the sacrifices, when sacrifices were made, it often referred to, and Yahweh received it as a sweet-smelling fragrance. And as we were reading today, towards the end in Ephesians, it says, and walk in love as Messiah also has loved us and gave himself for us a gift and an offering to Elohim for a sweet-smelling fragrance. Is there kind of a connection to like how we can please him and give him that fragrance, or through the forgiving?
Well, look, let's simplify the idea that the sweet-smelling fragrance is simply the idiomatic phrase for pleasure. It pleases him, okay? And that was just the idiomatic phrase of the time to say like a sweet-smelling fragrance, because like when somebody's cooking and you walk in and you smell it, and it's pleasing. It's a pleasing smell. It makes you feel good. It hits those pleasure sensors there. So it makes you smile. And so when you do these things, when you put others above yourselves, we have verses say, esteeming others above ourselves. You say, imitate Yeshua, who is willing to lay down himself, his life for his brothers. If you're willing to subjugate the me, by having outgoing concern for your brother. Because remember, when you're doing the wrath, displeasure, and slander, all you're thinking about is you. Now, you're doing it to somebody else, but you're doing it because you're hoping it's going to make you feel better. I mean, if you really were to think about it, you would know honestly that you're probably not going to get anything out of the response from the other person that you really were hoping. I have had this conversation in counseling with lots of people. I say, before you do anything, I want you to ask yourself, what is it that I'm hoping will happen? What's the outcome I'm looking for? And then ask yourself, is this thing I'm doing likely to bring that outcome? What is the outcome likely? Well, I want them to learn their lesson. Okay, so by slandering them and bashing them and all the other stuff you're doing, is that likely actually to happen? Or what is more likely? They're likely to attack you back or unfriend you on Facebook or say other things. I mean, you're likely to be escalating the war here. You're not actually going to get what you need. And so that doesn't bring a sweet-smelling fragrance. All right, so that's really, I want us to be more outcome-focused. And say, okay, is what I'm doing actually going to bring the outcome I was hoping for? Because even when we do the negative stuff, and somehow in our deluded mind, we think it's going to cause the person to just recognize how wrong they are and just come over to us and say, oh, I'm so glad you embarrassed me in public and attacked me in front of everybody, and I'm so sorry that I did whatever trespass to you. That's never going to happen. All you did was throw gas on the fire. And so let's just understand that. So that wasn't too out there, Mike. I mean, that's just it's again, we are to do what Yeshua said. We are to seek what is well-pleasing in the sight of the Father. Okay? And the others who have written and say, seek what is well-pleasing in the sight of the Master. We should desire to do what's well-pleasing in their sight. The thing is, we're so focused on ourselves and on the stuff that's happening to us, which is still focusing on yourself. Even though you don't think you're focusing on yourself. If you're still licking those wounds and just wallowing in your pain, that's about as selfish as it gets. Oh, but you don't understand. No. Anytime those words come out of your mouth, please stop right there and think, no, I'm probably the one that doesn't understand, okay? Not the person you're saying it to. You're trying to convince them, but you're also trying to convince yourself. You're the one that doesn't understand. You're only hurting you. And you're usurping when you want to try to bring judgment on somebody else that really judgment isn't yours. He says judgment and vengeance and everything, that's his, not yours. All right, next question. Okay, Jeannie?
Okay, you brought up the 613 commandments, and I understand the do's and the don'ts. So I'm trying to understand why we bring up the 613 commandments, because didn't that come out of the rabbinical system? They actually numbered came up with 613 versus Yahweh. He gave us 10 commandments, and if he could list the 10 commandments and the other commandments that are defined as the 613 are scattered through Torah, shouldn't we just be referring to them as the commands that we do or we don't do versus as Torah? Do you understand?
I understand your question. Okay, so
Okay.
First of all, I only referenced them as part of just making a joke about how many parts of a teaching. Okay, but also the idea that there are lots of do's and don'ts written in the Word. Look, the Talmud only mentions that there are 365 negative commands and 248 positive. It doesn't actually list them anywhere. Okay, other sages over the years have tried to come up with 613 because somebody once upon a time mentioned in one of the tractates that there were 613. Okay, the most famous being Moses Maimonides, Rambam, when he came up with his 613. But there's a lot of, obviously, instructions beyond just the 10. Okay, lots of things that are listed in Scripture that are not listed in the 10. Okay, and so the only reason I mentioned the 613 ever is I mentioned it from the point of view of just giving you an understanding perspective-wise that while there are a lot of things that he says to do and not do, a lot of them don't even apply to us. We could easily focus on the ones that actually do apply to us. And the only other time I ever focused on it was from the idea that to answer the mystery of what they are is I did a teaching to demonstrate what these verses, what these commands are. And some of them are stretches, I think, as finding them as hinted at commandments. And some of them I think that are actually overtly obvious they've left out of their list. But it's an arbitrary list, okay? Anybody that's put one together has arbitrarily went in there to try to find 613. And they specifically were looking for 365 negative and 248 positive, okay? 365 don'ts and 248 do's, because that's what it said in the Talmud. Now, that doesn't mean any of us has to do that. Okay? But this is just something that was put into a discussion once upon a time. Okay? What you want to do is seek out what is well-pleasing in our Heavenly Father's sight. All right? And so anything that you learn about that he says to do that actually would apply to you, you need to do it. And if it's something that it says don't do, and that would apply to you, you need to not do it. And by apply to you, we're not talking about dispensational, meaning that it's something you actually could do. And it actually would fit the description. Okay? Like there's a lot of Torah instruction about the sacrifices. Well, we're not allowed to do them without the temple. So you can't do those. You know, people say, and I make the joke all the time, I say, oh, well, now that you keep the commandments, what are you going to start stoning people? Well, you can't. That was connected to a bunch of things that we don't have today. It was connected to corporate Israel in the land with a judge system, a court system that we don't have. And so you couldn't do that according to the law. And like all law, this is part of why I did the 613 as a teaching, is to understand all law has with it jurisdiction and parameters and all kinds of things that have to do with how to implement that law and who it applies to, when it applies. I mean, there's certain commands that only apply on Shabbat, certain commands only apply on holy days, certain commands only apply for all different things. Okay? And so with those instructions, I mean, there's a bunch of commandments that have to do with husband and wife. If one is jealous of the other, thinks somebody's cheating, and those things only apply if you're married. So all law fits into that. So when I mention the 613, it's only from the perspective of just, look, there's a lot of law in there. And it's an arbitrary number that Judaism has used for a long time as a number that they use as a base to make the point. Just like making the point, hey, 70 times 7. So you're actually going to count 490 times? No. Okay, but you realize that it's just making a point that it's a lot of forgiveness. So the 613 is just telling you, look, there's a lot of instruction that covers all aspects of your life. And you may want to go and seek out and understand those ones which would apply to you. I don't mean apply to you, again, dispensationally, like, well, that was for them and this is for us. No, anything that you can do within the structure of what the law actually said, you need to do. Anything that says not to do, you need not do it. Okay? I mean, look, but there are very specific things that are for things that you would not. If you're a woman, all the man rules that are just for men wouldn't apply to you. If you're a man, all the woman rules wouldn't apply to you. If you're not a priest, I mean, that's why I brought that up, okay? But it's a good point. But also let's realize it's out there, and I don't think Jeannie was doing this at all, but out there, be careful with the fact that you're going to run into and find it in yourself. We still have an anti-Semitism problem. So let's be careful with it. I don't think that was a problem here. I'm just saying, but it could easily trigger with people when you hear the Hebrew liturgy. Or when, there's a bunch of people that get mad every time we do the services, and they're like, why are they doing all that Hebrew stuff? I don't know, because our Messiah did. It said imitate him. It's the language he spoke. I mean, come on. I mean, but then are you willing to deal with the anti-Semitism that may be in you? We get this online all the time whenever we have a live service. Or people in our affiliate congregations or any place that we have a congregation, a lot of times like, well, why are we doing all this Hebrew stuff? Because that's the language that everything was done in, and we want to learn it because we're imitating our Messiah. Your Messiah was born a Jew. Spent his whole life as a Jew. And he died as a Jew. We have to imitate him. What did he do? He did synagogue. He went to synagogue. He read the Torah. He kept Shabbat. He kept the feasts. Go listen to the teaching. What did Yeshua do? He kept everything. And he even did some of the things that would be more Jewish than more Torah. There's some things that he did that were very much because he was in that culture, and they were things that were not against Torah, and so he did them. And so we have to recognize that this is something you will probably run into, I would say, almost 100% guaranteed at some point you'll run into it, okay? Either in yourself or others or both. And if you find it in yourself, deal with it. In other words, get that thing dealt with and out of there. It does not help you in your forward movement, okay? I know a lot of you, was because you realized that the Christian system that you were in made so many mistakes that it makes you feel better to bash the Jewish side just as hard. Believe me, they got plenty coming to them for the stuff they've messed up. But let's not go at it from that emotional place, all right? Because then we're doing it as a pound of flesh thing as opposed to, or trying to balance scales that's not yours to balance. So be careful with that. It's an emotional thing. All right, well, who's next? Okay, Shira?
Thank you so much, Rabbi
welcome.
Steve. This is an area I'd like to bring up that some of us could easily overlook. And since your message last week, I've really been kind of having to look some stuff in the face where I thought I'd done all this forgiving. But what I've had to look in the face is sometimes we take up an offense on behalf of someone we feel very bonded with or loyal to. And what came to my mind through the Ruach was the people who have slandered and mistreated the leadership, this ministry, and some of these people hurt me personally, and I had really worked through the personal hurts, but Father unearthed what you talked about when there's a negative emotion attached, and I found that I still had negative emotions attached to what they did to you guys. And I've had to so I think the Bible talks about taking up offenses. So I just wanted to bring that up while we're doing the house cleaning.
Sure. Appreciate that. Look, appreciate it very much. Look, there have been people that have come up to me. My daughter's even been one of them. She said, well, when all these people are attacking you, as they do from time to time, that doesn't bother you, she says. I said, I say no. It may be initially for a second, but you have to release that quickly. Okay? Because otherwise, all of this will happen. All the stuff we talked about. And so you have to, you may have an initial quick reaction, but then you have to then grab a hold, and the heavenly mindset has to kick the fleshly mindset out of the way, and you have to release these things. Because if I were to be honest, these things are not surprising. They happen to anybody that gets in front of a microphone and has anything to say, right? And so it may surprise me who does it, because maybe I didn't expect this person or that person to do it. So that may surprise, but the fact that it's happening doesn't surprise, and shouldn't surprise you either. Look, they threw things at Yeshua. Every prophet they killed. So why would it surprise you that anybody that's out there, standing up in front of a group of people trying to teach what he believes, Yahweh is trying to get out there, is going to be attacked on some levels. But the emotional part, is important. And I've been accused of all kinds of emotional stuff that if those who were here who know and would watched all these things happen will tell you very clearly I didn't have any of those emotions I've been accused of. Not for more than 5 minutes or whatever, relatives to the same. But that's their filtering through, because they're upset. I must have been just as upset. And that's, and that doesn't say I don't ever get upset, but it's very short in terms of time frame and quickly released, because it has to be, or I couldn't do my job, let alone everything we read today about how the whole relationship vertically works. But I couldn't possibly do my job if I was always angry at everything. Now, there are times when I do have a little bit of angst with the body, trying to say, you guys need to just stop, not because of what's happening to me, because you're hurting each other, you're hurting yourselves, and I want to get in your faces a little bit. That's the cry aloud, spare not thing. That's not me in the flesh. At least I hope not most of the time, okay? It can be, I guess, but I'm trying to, it comes from, maybe something that happened during the week sparked it, but it sparked me to recognize it's something that needs to be dealt with. Not just because of one person. That's why I always tell people, if this is sounding like I'm talking about you, I am. But not you specifically. It might have been you and 15 other people this week that had the same sort of issue. Or maybe it happened and it's you this week, but I've been dealing with it for the last couple of months and finally realized enough is enough. Somebody needs to come up in front of the mic and address this thing. So yes, I am addressing you, whoever you may be. Now, this wasn't anything happened today, but in other teachings, somebody might be, oh, he's talking about me. Well, yes, I probably am. Okay, and don't take that personally, but it's not me trying to take it out on you personally. It's me dealing with the fact that if it's coming from the mic, it's because it's happening a lot, not because it was you. That's an important distinction. Because you could think, oh, I got him so mad he's talking about it. No, I'm not mad. I could be grieved, I guess, like the Holy Spirit. I teach you and I teach you, you don't listen, you do what you do, and it blows up in your face, and you come back to me. That grieves me. When I have to say, well, didn't I tell you? Well, people come to me saying, yeah, Rabbi, I know you told me, and then it happened. And okay, so that's a different emotion. It's a grief. Okay? Now, I have to be careful not let the grief then turn into anger and bitterness and other things that grief can, turn into. That could be a problem. All right? Who's next? All right, Steve?
I got a couple here. Let's see. I had one I wanted to start. When we want justice, we should watch out that we don't say to ourselves, aha, they got what they deserved.
Exactly.
In dealing with that.
And why is that? The reason is because you really, really don't know what they deserve. You don't. You can't. You don't know anybody well enough to know what they deserve or not. Only one does, okay? So if you even think and say, oh, that they serves them right, they got what they deserve. Well, no, you're just glad that they're suffering because you suffered and you want to see them suffer. And so what you're really saying is, I got what I deserve to see them suffer. That's really what you're saying. You see them suffering, instead of saying they got what they deserve, turn the words around so you know what you're really doing when you're thinking that way. I got what I deserve to see them suffer. I deserve to see them suffer. No, you didn't. That's really what you're saying, though. So I want to see it. I want to be there when it happens. Wrong mindset, not a heavenly mindset, fleshly mindset. All right, who's next?
I just had a...
Okay.
And then there was the word interchange, debt and transgression. Couldn't a debt be you owed by when you harm somebody, you cause a debt to them that you haven't repaid by trying to correct it?
Well, look, when you're talking about the idea of a debt, there's you create an obligation when you trespass to make restitution, to repent, to make teshuvah, whatever it is. And so a debt is created. Okay? And that's the way it works with our Heavenly Father. Yeshua paid the debt. That's the whole parable that we read about how the master can then say, I pay your debt for you. However, if you notice in the story, having the debt paid for you doesn't now guarantee everything's fine for you. Because he didn't then forgive the debt of the one to him. He ended up being put back into trouble and torture, etc. And that goes against that whole once saved, always saved deal, because apparently in the beginning of that story, the guy was saved, metaphorically, only to go and use it incorrectly, not take proper advantage of the situation, but to take advantage of the person instead of the situation, and therefore, instead of taking the opportunity to be like his master, he did the wrong thing, and therefore he was no longer forgiven the debt that he was forgiven. Now he's tortured and everything else. That's the obligation that we're under, to do things. So when you talk about a debt, yeah, trespasses do create a debt to a certain, you owe somebody an apology is a phrase we use. Yes. If you trespass somebody, you may owe them an apology. That is owed to them. That's a debt you have. That's why and my wife can tell you this if you ask her, okay? There's been times when I've apologized to people, she was like, why are you apologizing to them? They did this to you, they did that to you. And my answer is because it triggered me to do something that I shouldn't have done. And so I apologize for my part. I had a blowout fight at work one time. I was down in Florida. I mean, it was a big blowout. And I let the guy totally pop my cork. He was so wrong. But then I popped my cork. And so I went in the next day and I said, we still have a problem, but I want to apologize because I shouldn't have let what happened pop my cork like I did. Okay? Because that was my obligation. That was my debt. To own. Debt is basically, you know what the debt was? To own your obligation, to own what you did. Okay, the guy owed his master, that's his debt. When you sin, your debt is your life. So you have to now turn around and give your life to him. That is your debt. Okay, who's next?
Rabbi, can I ask a question on what you were just talking about?
Sure.
That? Okay. on that, on Matthew 18:27, it says the master forgave him. But then in 34,
He made him pay everything.
And he said, so is it saying that the debt, if he forgave him, then what is he making him pay back if it was already forgiven? So it wasn't wiped out, or what was forgiven, and then how could he bring it back if it was forgiven?
Okay, so for example, when you sin, you are obligated to, as a penalty, your debt is death, so to speak. Okay, so Yeshua died so we don't have to die. Guess what? If you continue to sin, you still get to die. All right? In other words, there's a process that goes beyond just the wiping out of the debt. Okay? If I speed and get a ticket, and I get a whole bunch of speeding tickets, I could have somebody go and pay them for me, pay the debt, but if I continue to speed, they still might throw me in jail and take away my license. But the debt was paid. Okay, so it's not a once-for-all thing. That's sort of, again, you're struggling not only against a fleshly versus heavenly, you're also struggling versus a Hebraic Torah-based versus Christian mindset. Okay, the Christian mindset wants to read all these verses into now everything's great. The debt's been paid, it's all good. But see, the parable doesn't play out that way. In the parable, the debt was paid, but yet at the end, he's made to pay all. And so there's a whole different price. Okay? Live stream.
Okay, from Dale Taylor, it says in Mark 11:26, are the trespasses in this verse against Yahweh, or are they against others, or both? Does trespassing against others result in trespassing against Yahweh?
Okay, so all trespasses, remember, what did David say when he got called out on his sin? He said, Father, I've sinned against you and you alone. All trespasses are against Yahweh, because he didn't make you to do and treat people. Remember, you got to love him and love each other the way he instructs, otherwise you're trespassing. So if I don't treat you right, I'm trespassing against you and him. When I do things that have to do with him and I don't do it right, I'm only trespassing against him. But both ultimately involve him. Okay, that's as far as your trespasses. So what is he talking about here? He could be talking about either one of them, because ultimately you want your father to forgive you when you've done things you shouldn't do, you've trespassed, or you didn't do stuff you were supposed to do, which again was a trespass, if you don't forgive others their trespasses. And by the way, that includes people that obligated themselves to do something that they didn't do it, and you hold that against them. It's not always stuff they do. We have a lot of trouble at times forgiving and dealing with people who didn't do what they said they would do and didn't do what you needed them to do, what they promised to do, whatever they obligated themselves to do. And that's part of it as well. Okay, next.
From Lisa Hersey, says, Rabbi, when we come to the time of judgment, is there any indicator in Scripture that our forgiven other person will stop that person from being judged by Yah?
Say it again.
She said, when we come to a time of judgment, is there any indicator in Scriptures that our forgiven another person will stop that person from being judged by Yah?
I don't see any indication in Scripture that your forgiving or not forgiving people has any effect on them in that way, in any way. Okay? Now, your forgiving them may affect your horizontal relationship if you work towards resolution, reconciliation, etc. You may forgive them and they may never know. But your forgiving them is all about you. Forgiveness is about the person doing the forgiving until it gets pushed to the next level if you desire resolution, reconciliation. All right? So as far as like Judgment Day, which is the rest of your question, no, I don't think your forgiving or not forgiving them will have any effect on where they stand. It'll have every effect on where you stand. Okay? So your only interaction with other people when it comes to forgiveness is if there's a desire to take it to the next levels, resolution, reconciliation, restoration.
Okay, from Rabina Rebecca, what if trespassing is very current, time span of a few days? How do we work to resolve this?
Okay, I'm sorry, was the word reoccurring? In other words, something's happening often? What, I didn't hear it. Read it again.
It says if the trespassing is very current,
Very current?
a time span of a few days, how do we work to resolve this?
All right, well, again, we'll start off with forgiveness. You got to let go of the negative emotional, response to the trespass. And then resolving it, that takes 2. Okay? The rest of the stuff takes 2. The first one only takes you. Forgiveness is just you. Reconciliation, restoration, that takes resolving. To resolve takes 2. You can't reconcile by yourself. All right? So then that's something that needs to be worked out between the two of you, what that resolution looks like. It has to be where there's an agreement that comes to where each person is satisfied that whatever the trespass is will cease happening. Otherwise, you don't have resolution. You have to have the two agree to stop the trespassing situation. And that's going to be unique to whatever the issue is, all right? But you need to let go of the negative emotional response. Otherwise, nothing can happen going forward.
From Lori Bornstein, is there a difference between sin and trespass?
No. I mean, the difference is that trespass can happen. Well, I guess, let me say yes then. No, by the point that all sin is a trespass. Okay, so no, there's no difference. But yes, they are different in that there are trespasses that are not actually laid out in Torah that are not sin. They just are things you would rather not happen. Okay? Did that make sense? So all sin is a trespass. To sin, you must trespass. However, there are things that you and I may have in a relationship which I feel you are trespassing. That has nothing to do with Torah. There's nothing against it in Torah. That has nothing. But I personally, in our relationship, would prefer you didn't do it, or you would prefer I didn't do, or whatever. There could be a trespass in that way. In other words, we can make commitments as a married couple. If I'm married to my wife and I have a commitment where I have obligated myself to maintain the cars, and then her light's been on that oil light and whatever, and it's been needing a change, and I haven't done it, that could be a trespass in our relationship because I've fallen short of an obligation and I've disappointed and I've created a problem, etc. But that's not a Torah issue. There's no commandments that deal with that. Okay, I just fell short in a relationship of an obligation or a responsibility or an expectancy. And so those are where trespasses can be. Trespasses have to do with, I think this is really good that the question was asked because now I just got an inspiration here. It has to do with how we respond to expectancy. See, that's why all sin is trespass, because when you don't meet an expectancy in terms of what he obligates us to, that's sin. He says, do this, and you don't do it. His expectancy is that you'll do it. So if you don't, that's sin. He says, don't do that, and you went and did it. His expectancy is that you'll listen and not do it, but you did it. So it's a trespass. So you can have that in personal relations with your children. If you ask your child to not leave whatever it is somewhere, or to remember to turn off a light or whatever, these things, if they don't do it, if they don't listen, that's a trespass. They didn't meet an expectancy. It's not Torah, though. I guess you could say, well, it had to do with honoring mother and father. That's a whole different thing, okay? But trespasses don't always end up being sin, but all sin is a trespass. How's that? Some of you guys just went back to your Greek logic syllogisms and had a nightmare. I failed that class. No, go ahead.
Okay, from Becky Gwynn, it says, have we still not forgiven, even if we thought we have, if we feel in our hearts we don't want to spend eternity with those who have or continue to trespass in our lives?
Look, if you are thinking that thought, there's still a forgiveness problem because you're still trying to sit in that judge seat. You're not allowing for Abba to work with them. You're not allowing for their lives to turn around. You're not allowing for him to decide who gets to get in and who doesn't and how that all looks, okay? All you are allowed to do, in my opinion, when it comes to all this, all you're allowed to do is to say, as long as they are the way they are right now, I feel it's best in my safety to stay away from them. I'm not judging them. I pray that they'll turn around, they'll make teshuvah, that Abba will wake them up, they'll get their life right. But as long as they are like they are right now, where they just did this stuff to me and they've been doing it consistently for a period of time. Not like it's, please don't overreact to somebody doing something once. Unless it was like a really heinous thing, like we're talking like rape or something. I'm saying, but if somebody, if you're clashing with somebody and it only happens once, don't like think that, oh, that's dangerous and awful, unless it really was something that literally is dangerous. But you may be in constant banging heads conflict with somebody for year after year after year. That may be a relationship that's not good for either of you. You might need to have counsel about that. Okay, but from the point of view of the question being asked here, if you are thinking about their eternity, if you're thinking about where they stand with the Father, you haven't let it all go. Because you have to also let go any judgment on them. You have to release them to Him. Let them go to Him. Release them into His hands. Well, I don't want to spend forever with them. Well, nobody would want to spend forever with somebody as long as that's the way they still are. But why would you think they would still be that way in the forever? If they're in the forever, they will have had to have turned around their life, gotten themselves straight with their Creator, gotten themselves properly aligned in covenant to be there. So they're not going to be there and be the same person that abused you. I'm assuming that the reason people feel that way tends to be from abusive places. Okay? If they're there, you should be excited to see them there because that means that they got it turned around. All right? But can you get to the emotional place where you can accept that that reality could be? Because they can't get there if they don't turn it around. I mean, genuinely turn it around. They cannot get there. They have to genuinely turn it around, or Abba won't let them in. So I have to let them in so they can abuse anybody else if they're still in that terrible mindset. Start trespassing. Do you think there's going to be any trespassing in the kingdom? Of course not. During the millennium, what people are figuring out there will be. Not in the kingdom. There will be no trespassing. Everybody there will be fine for you to interact with, and you can be completely safe and comfortable. Otherwise, what? You don't trust Him for that? You got to trust Him for that. All right, next.
Okay, from Lisa Hersey. Do you think our testimony about an interaction will have anything to do with how someone is judged?
I'm sorry, the reason I'm pausing is I'm really trying to figure out what it is that you're really getting at, because your questions are all kind of similar enough. And I want to make sure to really address what you're really asking. And I think what you're really asking is, how much effect do I have on the other person when they sit before the Father? And the answer is 0. Okay? That should end all questions. All right? There's nothing you can say or do that He doesn't already know. There's no testimony you can make that He doesn't already know. He watched it, He saw it, He was there when everything happened. You are there to work out your own salvation by yourself and sit at that judgment seat by yourself for all the things that you did. And you're not going to be able to bring in all your friends and family to try to convince the judge what a wonderful person you were. He knows what you were. Either you were or you weren't. But He knows. Doesn't need anybody's testimony to know. Okay? You all are responsible ultimately for yourself. Okay? And that's part of the problem, is that you don't want to own. See, some horrible thing happened to you when you were younger, and then you, at some point, refuse to own the fact that you have continued to make choices because of that instead of letting it go and making choices that could be different. And you want to keep blaming, well, I'm all screwed up because of them. Well, no, you were screwed up because of them. You remain screwed up because of you. I know that's going to hurt somebody. I'm sorry. Okay, you were damaged and screwed up in your life because of what happened. If it's been many, many years, if you're still screwed up about it, it's because of you. You have not done what needs to be done to stop allowing that to keep damaging you now. How do I know this? Because I've read hundreds of stories or listened to of people who give testimony for every kind of possible awful, abusive, whatever, who overcame all that to do amazing things because they refused to allow it to define them. Okay? even though it did define them at the time and for a period of time. And it's reasonable, if it was awful and abusive, to have a period of time where it takes to process and to find help and to work through. But if what happened to you 30 and 40 years ago, at what point do you get to start owning your choices? Okay, I'll give you an example, all right? My personal example, okay? Because I got really tired of being accused of this a few years back. You know, I went on a journey in 2003, and that's been out there in public, where in that journey, and I'll tell the story once, another point, but in that journey, I ended up leaving ministry. The journey had nothing to do with anything but spiritual stuff. It had to do with the fact that this book, which I had been reading, had proven to be the deeper, we looked into it, messed around with by man having his hands on it, okay? And in that journey, I eventually put the New Testament up on the shelf, and then eventually put the Old Testament up on the shelf, because there was too many things that I didn't know what to do with, making the story short. Now, because I was doing it in public, I was a teacher, there were others that followed me in the journey, so to speak. They saw things that I saw, had the same type of problems, and they went and eventually left these things behind to a certain degree. Now, I was accused and blamed all these years for a lot of people having left, quote unquote, Yeshua in belief. That's my fault. Now, I do have a responsibility as a teacher. I have a double responsibility that people were listening to me. But at some point, they're going to be responsible for the choices they made. I never made them make any choices. And the question that I want to ask all of you, at what point is it your choice that's really being judged here, not the influence of somebody else? Where do you start having to own your choices? So yes, I own that, yes, I had an influential position as I do now. And I own that double judgment of teacher. I readily accept that he put me through that journey for a reason, etc. That's a long story. We'll talk about it in a testimony teaching. But the point is, after being out for 10 years, okay, for 7 full years, coming back after in the 8th year of new beginnings, I came back. Others came back. Most people didn't. But they have to own that choice. If you're going to let other people think for you and make decisions for you, etc., well, that's your choice. And so this comes to the same thing, that I can't give a testimony about you that undermines or changes the fact that underneath whatever I saw about you, there was a bunch of dead men's bones or something going on inside there that I didn't know, but he knows. My testimony isn't going to override that if I'm there to advocate for you. There's nothing I can say that he doesn't already know. The most hopefully empowering thing that I can tell you is that you are primarily responsible for you. I've said this before. I think we made a little thing of it, okay? You are primarily responsible for you and what you do, and you on Judgment Day will be judged based on what you chose to do or not do. You will not be able to say, but my mother, but my father, but this person, but my teacher. That's only going to fly so far. Now, while you were under the teacher, if you submitted to that teacher because you vetted that teacher and all that stuff, yes, that will then go on the teacher. If the teacher was wrong, that will go on the teacher. But once you've left that teacher, if you realize that teacher was wrong, look, you're not going to be judged and have an excuse, well, I was Catholic or I was Baptist, I was Pentecostal, I was this or that or whatever it is. You're going to be judged based on what you know now. Okay? And some of you, because of your journey through Christianity, you were probably all of those. Because a lot of you went through 5 or 6 different things. And you're not going to be held against you, whatever it is that was before. The past is going to be, where did you end up? What are your beliefs? What are your feelings now? Where are you now? And do you own that? Own your choices. Is that fair? Because I had to say that to somebody who was getting all in my face about all these people that made choices because they were following me. And I said, I own a certain amount of that. I said, but at some point, and at some part of that, they're going to have to own it too. It's not just all on the teacher. Is that fair? This isn't a cult. Nobody shows up at your house and makes you do anything or makes you not do anything. Information goes out, you go home and you do what you want. You listen to it or you don't listen to it. You follow it or you don't follow it. That's what you're going to be judged on. what he says and how you understand it and what you do with it. Anyway, next question.
Okay, from
I feel like I confused things more than I helped that, but giving half a testimony there, but go ahead.
you got a lot of agreements on that one and a lot of thumbs up. I think they were getting it. From Charlie and Deanne Johnson, from Deanne, and this question, it may cover quite a few questions. People, what if you, quote unquote, think you forgave, but anger still appears at times when not expected? Is that just human nature and feelings that need to go back in the bag? Some people are asking if you've forgiven a spouse, but all of a sudden you get angry for no reason, and there's other questions along those lines. You feel anger and for what you think is no reason.
All right. I don't know about when you say anger for no reason, because for it to be a forgiveness issue, you need to know why. If you have a trigger that you know what the why is, then you could say that is something that may not have been forgiven completely. Okay, so think of a negative traumatic, a trauma in your life, a negative traumatic experience as a cancer. When you forgive, you hopefully remove all of it. When you have a response sometime later that triggers the negative response, you may realize a little piece was left behind that you need to pull out and remove, okay? You'll never know if you've truly completely done it until you go through life no longer being triggered by it. So you won't really know until something can possibly trigger it. Then when it comes up and you realize it didn't trigger, I must have actually fully released it. Okay, so don't look at forgiveness as like a switch. You forgive, you didn't forgive. No, it's a process. You do the best you can, and until something tests it, you won't really know. And then when it tests it, don't be all like, ugh. Just be like, oh, wow, I'm glad that the test came because I realize now there's some part of this I really haven't let go of yet. So it gives you an opportunity to let go of more of it. Okay? But you won't know until you test it, which is why he allows a spouse, friend, whoever it is, significant other in your life that can trigger things to trigger them. Because that's how you know if you've released it or not. If you released it, it won't trigger. Okay? It can't trigger because it's gone. Okay? Next.
Okay, from Leona Fulton. Says, I have a family member who's constantly reminding me of the past situations in my life. I have forgiven those in these situations and have voiced that I want to move on. How do I get her to stop?
Okay, this is two different things. Okay, first thing is forgiveness is not an idea. It's a releasing of the negative emotion. Okay? It's not like you sit here going, I forgive her, I forget. No. Is there the negative emotion there? Now, that's half of it. The other half of it is setting boundaries appropriately. If a person is the one who trespassed is still in a mindset that nothing has changed as far as they're concerned, so they're likely to keep trespassing. If they keep trespassing, you need to own that you've allowed that. Okay? There may be somebody online that hopefully they know that I am talking to them because I want them to hear this. There's some negative stuff that's going on. Some of the people, there's a bunch of people I know that are online. They talk to me and they say, well, my spouse, my wife, my husband, my friend, this thing, my kid, my parent, whatever, it keeps trespassing this thing. Well, if they keep doing it, it's because you keep letting them. Draw the boundary, have consequences. I don't mean consequences like, did you get mean and nasty? I mean like where you say, if you keep doing this, then I'm no longer going to be where you can keep doing it. Your child behaves a certain way, and they don't listen, and they keep trespassing, and they don't listen, and they keep trespassing. I'm talking about an old enough child where they can be thrown out. You tell them, consequences. This continues, you need to leave. Don't say it unless you mean it, though. If it continues, then they need to leave. Otherwise, don't ever say anything because now you've made things worse because now you've undermined any integrity you have. Don't threaten a consequence and be a liar. You say a consequence and that happens, whatever it is, the consequence needs to happen. Otherwise, you have lost all potential leverage whatsoever to get anything to stop happening. Okay, so boundaries have to have consequences. Yahweh says, nobody is to come up on the mountain past this point or they will die. It's a consequence. Scary one, so that nobody would trespass beyond a boundary. I'm not saying you should have that level boundary. But you should have a boundary that says, look, if you keep doing this, the relationship will change. I may have to move on. It may lead to a divorce. It may lead to some other thing. I mean, I've got some husbands and wives where it doesn't matter which one will say, well, he keeps doing this or she keeps doing that. I go, and they're like, I don't know why. I'm like, because you keep letting him. What do you mean I keep letting him? Well, there hasn't been a consequence to cause him to stop. Or for you to realize he isn't going to stop or she isn't going to stop. And if that's the case, now it's your choice to either just tolerate it and stop whining about it. I'm serious. If you're not going to do something about something, then stop complaining. Well, I don't like it when I don't like it when he. Okay, so what are you going to do about it? I don't mean that in a mean way. Are you going to get counsel? Well, they won't counsel. All right, well, then you only have choice you have is to, look, I'm sorry to say, and if you want to go back and listen to divorce, remarriage, and putting away teaching, the only leverage you have in a marriage is divorce. There is no other leverage. You can't hit them. You can't punish them. You can't put them in timeout. There's nothing you can threaten the other person with. All you can do is divorce. And you can be serious and say, look, if we don't counsel, I don't want a divorce. If we don't counsel, if we don't start doing something, that's the only choice you're giving me if you're going to continue to trespass. Don't say it, though, unless you're ready to go through with it. But I know, listen, then don't complain. You can't have it both ways. You can't be unwilling to do something and then complain. Well, actually you can, but just don't complain to me. Okay? Don't complain to me if you're not willing to do something if a solution is presented. Now, you can complain the first time, and then I say, okay, I get it, you're upset about this, whatever. Here's my recommendation solution-wise, and then you come back to me and I say, well, did you do what I recommended? No. Are you going to do what I recommended? No. Did you do anything else to make the thing stop? No. Fine, stop complaining to me. I don't need to hear you complaining. Oh, but he won't stop, but she won't stop, because you're not making them stop. What do you mean make them stop? Give them a consequence that'll motivate them to stop. Well, there are nothing I can do to them. Yes, you could say, if this doesn't stop, I'm going to leave. That's your only motivation, threat that you can use. Now, don't use that for every little petty nonsense, okay? I mean, tolerate most things, because most of us are all whining about the dumbest things I've ever heard of. But there are some serious ones. There are serious trespasses going on in some marriages. Well, why doesn't she stop? Why doesn't he stop? I don't know. What have you been doing? Nothing. What have you what kind of leverage do you have? None. How about saying, look, if this doesn't stop, I'm going to pack my bags and I'm going to leave. But don't say it unless you're going to pack your bags and leave. If it doesn't stop. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm talking about the same thing with a parent. You bring a parent into your house. They're older. They need some help, but they're about to wreck your entire house and your whole dynamic because they're miserable older people. Anybody know any of those? Not my parents are great, but I'm saying I know people and they have some miserable older people in their house. Okay? You know what? They don't have to be in your house. You can say, Mom, Dad, I'd love to take care of you. But if you don't knock it off, I'm putting you in a home. How does it work with children? How do we get children to stop? Consequences. Why do children today generally not stop doing anything? They don't ever get any consequences. We've taken away all consequences. So they do everything and anything. What does Yahweh tell us? If you don't listen, I'm going to curse you. That's a consequence. If you don't behave, I'm going to throw you out of the land. That's a consequence. If you don't listen, I'm going to have another nation come and take you away. It's a consequence. And they all happened. Yahweh doesn't make idle threats. They're not even threats. They're consequences. He says, if you, then I. Statement's a fact. It's not a threat. Don't threaten. Just state it as a fact. If you continue to do this thing, I will leave. It's not a threat. Are you threatening me? No, I'm just telling you straight. It's with the child. If you keep doing that, or if you don't get up and get a job, or you don't do this, your stuff will be on the front lawn with new locks on the doors. Oh, you threatening me? No, I'm just telling you facts. Oh, but my child will never be able to. That's not your problem. At what point does their life become their life? I got a lot of parents. I'm not talking about you with younger children. I'm talking about people with adult age, 30 and 40-year-old children. Well, if I throw them out, they'll never survive. Well, that's their problem. Oh, you're so cold-hearted, Rabbi. Well, how are they ever going to figure it out if you coddle them forever? Do you want them in your house till they turn 60? You're only going to get rid of them when you die. That's your only escape. That's a lousy way to work this out. You know? But they can't live out there on their own. So it's not your problem anymore. They're not 10 or 8 or 12 or whatever. They're 30. You know, birds get thrown right out of the nest. There you go, fly. I don't know how to fly. Well, you'll figure it out before you hit the ground, hopefully. Boot them out. Come on. All right. But don't do it with a negative emotional place. Don't do it with unforgiveness. Don't do it because you're angry. Do it when you're calm. So when I'm talking about you spouses and your problems, don't say all this, I'm going to leave when you're angry in the heat of the moment. Do it when you're calm and say, look, I'm calm now. What just happened needs to not happen anymore. And if it's going to keep happening, I'm telling you calmly, I am going to leave. Okay? Do not do it when you're angry. Am I making sense? Okay? All right. We're getting into some stuff. I'm sure that didn't stir anything up on the internet. Not at all.
Okay, from Olivia and Janet Hoffman. It says, Rabbi, what would you recommend to do when, in context of a family or spouse or child, does not forgive and hold the bitterness? Can we do something to help the unforgiven spouse/child to forgive?
The only thing you can do with somebody else that you're dealing with is having a forgiveness problem. And by the way, the only way that manifests is that you see them wallowing in or holding on to a negative emotional state, is to help them to see how it's only hurting them. Okay? And you can only do that when hopefully the two of you are in a relatively calm place so they don't think you have any other agenda. Especially if the person they're mad at is not you. That could possibly work. All right? If it's you that they're mad at, that's probably not going to work no matter what you do, because they're just not going to be able to hear what you're saying. But they need somebody, a third party, someone who's not involved, to help them see that all they're doing is hurting themselves and their relationships around them, and that it is contagious. In other words, it's not contained just in the, like if Manny and I have a problem, that toxicity will spill over to other people in the office, other people here at work. In other words, if we don't, it doesn't stay contained if it goes on for a period of time. It's toxic. He'll talk to somebody, I'll talk to someone. Next thing you know, it's stirring up a lot of people. There's no way around it. You can contain it for only so long. So when initially it stays contained. But if you maintain that bitterness, and it doesn't mean that both of us do. If only one of us maintains the anger, the bitterness, the hurt, and doesn't forgive, that person can only contain it for so long. It needs to come out. And it's going to toxically affect everything around. That's what you can explain to somebody that doesn't let go. They have to understand that they're not hurting the other person, they're only hurting themselves. Okay? And they're hurting other relationships they have. All right? You are at work. I'll talk to the men for a minute. You're at work. I'll do the ladies too in a minute. Okay, you're at work. You have something lousy going on with your boss or another employee or something, and that thing, you just can't forgive it, and you come home and you about it all day long to your wife. And this goes on week after week. You're hurting your marriage. Your wife had nothing to do with it, but because you're hurting maybe your relationship with your children. Do you see how that could happen? Because that anger, you come home angry. And you couldn't take it out maybe on your boss or your coworkers. So you can take it out on whoever's closest and easiest to get to. Out of the abundance of the heart, right? That anger's got to come out. Ladies, same thing. Those children are driving you insane. Your husband comes home. First thing you do is you take all of that frustration and anger and dump it in his face. It's going to hurt your marriage. You got to find a way to bring it to him that's not toxic. Okay? And so, or maybe the ladies are working. Same thing. I don't want to be, the ladies are going to be all mad. We only think old women are housewives. I think housewives are the greatest thing in the world. If you can, because our children are suffering because we don't have enough of that. But let's say you're at work, same thing, and you have a problem at work and you bring that home. Whatever it is, it's toxic. Because especially if the person you're mad at, you do not have the ability to vent it directly at. I'm not saying you should, but if you can't have any kind of resolution possible there because it's your boss that you're mad at and you don't want to get fired, you're going to come home and spew that anger at somebody. Or you're going to vent it to other coworkers who are now going to be being pushed and pressured to look at the boss the way you look at the boss, and it can get them in trouble. All right, what else?
Okay, from Livia and Janet Hoffman says, Rabbi, I've always heard a lack of forgiveness is linked to health problems. I know cursing can come as a result of unforgiveness. Do you have any comments about this?
All right, so my wife and I, when we were first wanting children, and we struggled, there were some issues, whatever, we found a couple of naturopathic people that could recommend some things, whatever, as anybody might look for, and we ended up watching a live seminar by one of these guys that had some stuff we thought might help us, whatever, but he was giving a free live thing at the local health food store, and we went, and one of the things he said was very powerful. He said, this is from a health point of view, any thought that's less than a loving thought is actually toxic in the body. Okay, so unforgiveness is not a loving thought. So the more time you spend in negative, non-loving thoughts, it's kind of like the verses we read about focus on the love and focus on the good things. We read that in the darkness and light teaching also, to focus on those things that are edifying and uplifting and those things that are good, because the other stuff is actually unhealthy physically. Thoughts are things. They're not just, this ethereal whatever that goes on in your head. They're actually electrical charges to it, vibrational essences to it. They're actually things. It affects your body's immune system. It affects your body's stress levels. It affects the production of cortisol and other things that could adversely affect your body. So, yeah, good point about that. Unforgiveness, which is, again, only hurting you, is going to stress your system, and the negative emotions are going to damage your health. Because any thought less than a loving, well, let's put it this way, anything less than the first two things I was talking about the thoughts from above versus the thoughts that are flesh, anything that's not shalom and emunah, toxic to the body. All fleshly thoughts are toxic to the body. Okay? We're taking this to a whole nother place. All right? No, it's important. All right, these things will adversely affect your health. All right? That is why the more stressed you are, the more you find yourself catching a cold, catching a flu, getting sick, being under the weather. The more good you're feeling, you tend to not get sick, because our mental and emotional state affects our immune systems. Okay? Very strong immune system booster. Go do things that help you to feel at peace and feel good and feel loved, and your immune system gets cranked right up. Okay? All right, Steve?
I have a comment. I guess that's where stinking thinking comes from then.
Yeah, thinking, I guess, comes from that a little bit. But who do you think you are, Zig Ziglar? Okay. Okay, what else you got? Are we done?
Okay, from Libby, it says, there's scriptures that tell us to get rid of all malice. She refers to 1 Peter 2:1. Is unforgiveness a form of malice?
Well, I mean, one of the possible negative emotional states of unforgiveness could be malice. Okay? So, I mean, when you don't forgive, it really depends, because you may have something happen to you that makes you angry. You may have something happen to you that makes you ashamed, that makes you feel insecure. I mean, there are lots of negative emotional states you can be in. Not all of them will generate malice. Many of them will, though. It's just another one of those emotional negative states that absolutely can come out of unforgiveness. And by the way, that malice, we'll call it hate or whatever, that could be focused inward, not just outward. A lot of people end up in a terrible place of self-loathing, self-hate, because they feel the blame of allowing stuff to happen to them. Okay? And so, you got to start to learn to draw your boundaries. We really need to start to wrap it up because I don't want this to go too long because we are now putting these on CDs and go ahead, Michael, do you have something real quick?
Is unforgiveness a type of hypocrisy, given that in the context of covenant, since we're forgiven?
Yes, because it's hypocrisy if you expect him to forgive and you're not willing to do it also. So from that point of view, yes. When he gives it in the model prayer, he's making the point of hypocrisy. He says, don't ask forgiveness when you're not willing to give forgiveness.
From Klein family, it says, Rabbi, Ephesians 4:31-32 today, and in the darkness and light teaching crossover, are these pulling together the warnings, selfishness, those not in him will be self-destructive?
If I understood the question correctly, I would say yes. That was a quick and easy one. And I did bring the linkage between the darkness and light into the teaching there because, if you are in an unforgiving state, this is darkness. If you're, struggling with all those negative emotions, that's darkness. In the light, there's only shalom and emunah. Okay? And in the context of those two, love is in there because love is a part of peace. Love is a part of all that, okay?
You want another one? Okay, from Jennifer, says question, says, I have written down some positive things to speak over myself and my kids. Would it make forgiving others any easier if I spoke over myself that I, quote unquote, I choose to be a forgiven person?
I'm sure that could help. I mean, everybody's different, but the more you can bring it to your own attention, the more you're likely to do it. Okay, so if you're going to speak it over the children, you speak it over yourself, you remind yourself in your prayers. That's why it's in the model prayer, to remind you need to do it. Okay? So that's an important thing as well. Okay, and I guess I'm going to change my statement from that you need peace, love, and emunah. Okay, so we'll add love specifically in there because as Paul teaches us in 1 Corinthians 13, love covers all things, it forgives all things, et cetera, et cetera. So, and I think that's still a part of peace, but just for those who don't make the automatic connection that I do, we'll stick that in there separately. So, but love from a Elohim place, the way he describes it, not just the Eros love or the Philadelphia love, but more of the agape love, okay?